Hey there, stand-up listeners. If you're a regular or even just a casual listener to this podcast, you'll want to check out our live event happening this spring. The Stand-Up Pod Jam, Saturday, March 23rd in Las Vegas. General admission tickets start at just $25. Beginning at 10 a.m., you could be part of the live podcast audience. Then round off the day with some comedy and music, featuring frequent guests and funny humans, J.L. Covan, Ophira Eisenberg, Christian Finnegan, and even Pete himself, as well as musical guests Gareth Sever of comedy percussion group Buckets and Boards, and Grammy Award-winning songwriter John Carroll. It's Stand Up with Pete Dominic Live, the Stand Up Pod Jam. Follow the link in the show notes for more info and to purchase your tickets now.
Stand up.
Thank you, Pete Coe, and I hope to see you in Vegas. Hello, my friends. Welcome to today's show. It's the Thursday show. It is the 25th of January, and it means there's a hangout this evening. Every Thursday night, there's a hangout I host, and if you are a paid subscriber of Stand Up, you can join us. Maybe tonight is your night. Maybe you haven't been in a while. We'd love to have you back. I know it gets a little inside baseball, a little clicky sometimes, but I am always trying to break that down and bring new people, new voices into our community, into our hangout, introduce you to other amazing people. So stop by tonight at 8 p.m. or any Thursday at 8 p.m. Go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic right now to become a subscriber. If you haven't, tell your friends about the podcast. Joining me on it today, he is the president of the Florida Education Association, the largest teachers union, largest anything union in Florida, and I'm really happy when he is able to join me. Andrew Spar, my old friend, our old friend Andrew Spar, stops by in a moment. But first, I've got the news, an abbreviated version because I'm up late this morning with the podcast. And you can blame our friend Desiree and her husband Ryan, who came into New York last night. And I was the surprise part of the big gift for her big 4-0. Happy 40th, Desiree. We've gotten to know each other over the years through the show, through our hangouts. And Desiree and Ryan are amazing couple who have 3 kids and live in Southern California. If you've ever come to our hangouts, you've probably met them, and we're really excited. I was very excited to meet them when they came into town. But Ryan hadn't told Desiree that I was going to be coming to town, and she had texted me. She's like, oh my gosh, Ryan surprised me with, that's my impression of Desiree, Ryan surprised me with a New York City visit. Any chance you can come in? And I said, I'm busy. Sorry, it's such short notice, or something like that. And then it was already planned. So I showed up at the restaurant, and Ryan and Desiree bought me dinner as well as a bottle of wine we split, and it was a wonderful visit. It was so nice meeting them. I love to meet folks that I've gotten to know through the program, and everybody is always so cool and never an axe murderer. As a matter of fact, Ryan's a hot firefighter, Desiree's husband. We've talked about it. Anyway, Ryan and Desiree, thank you so much. Happy birthday, Desiree. You're such an awesome person, so inspiring. You do so many nice things for people all the time, and we see you, and we appreciate you, and we're grateful to have you guys in our world. Now, let's get to the world, the news. Here are your headlines. Let's start with the political roundup. I'm not going to say too much about the Republican primary races. So many headlines and ways to look at that, but it's going to wrap up soon, and I just can't take it this morning. But there are other and related things, political stories I should mention, and specifically around the election. For example, the United Automobile Workers Union, which backed President Biden in 2020, endorsed his re-election again. President Biden joined striking auto workers on a picket line last year, something that was fairly unprecedented during our time. I don't think any president has ever done that, as a matter of fact. Anyway, the head of the UAW also called Donald Trump a scab. Sean Fine called Trump a scab. So he is a tough guy. He's a tough guy. That's Sean Fine. Nikki Haley turned her campaign to South Carolina, where she was, of course, governor. Some Republicans now want her to drop out. Trump is threatening her donors, and some of them are inspired by the threats and actually donating to Nikki Haley. And everybody out there has an idea for what Nikki Haley should do, including holding 3 town halls a day, every day in South Carolina, talking about Trump and trying to educate these people, which still I don't think would work. More Republicans in Congress are now endorsing Donald Trump as he moves closer to becoming the party's nominee, and all of them are disgraced forever, stained forever. He easily won New Hampshire, but he has a lot of weaknesses with independents and college-educated voters that could hurt him in a general election, according to analysis from just about everybody I'm seeing. All right, I said I wasn't going to talk about it, and I think I kind of did, but I didn't want to get into all the gossip. Speaking of which, though, and other political gossip, this is a fascinating story from Arizona where there appears to be a recording that shows the Arizona Republican Party trying to bribe Kari Lake, who is a Trump acolyte, of course, to drop her Senate bid. And she decided to expose him, and now the chairman denied the charge, but he resigned for fear that she was going to put out more of these audio tapes. That's a pretty interesting and fascinating story. Will that empower Kari Lake even more for her Senate bid and potential vice presidential candidate, by the way? The Biden administration asked the Energy Department to study the climate impact of enormous natural gas facility before it decides whether to approve the project, which is pretty huge news. Also, one of the leading environmentalists of our time, Bill McKibben, says, I think we just won because of this. Biden halting the biggest fossil fuel expansion on Earth as a potential result. It's a great piece that he's written about it, but this is been a big fight, apparently, for McKibben and other environmentalists that I wasn't paying much attention to, but now I am. We will see what happens and what develops with that natural gas facility. And this is a terrible story. In Ohio, their Republican-controlled legislature there voted to ban minors from receiving gender-affirming care, and that overrides the Republicans' governor's veto. And before anybody reads into gender-affirming care as like cutting off your penis or your vagina when you're a teenager, that's not what we're talking about here. And look into it. If the Republican governor of Ohio is against what the Republicans want to do, you got to imagine that he has been listening to the experts. God forbid we listen to psychological and health and other doctors and experts on these issues. He did. He vetoed it, and they overrided his veto for these people, and it's these young people, and it's just rough stuff. And read more about it. Tell me more about it if you know more about it. In the Israeli-Hamas war, Israel ordered the evacuation of a small but packed area in southern Gaza, to which more than 400,000 people have fled. An attack killed at least 9 people at a UN facility where Gazans were sheltering, according to the UN. Families of Israeli hostages are protesting at a border crossing to block aid from entering Gaza. Israel declassified more than 30 military and government orders to challenge South Africa's charge of genocide in Gaza in the International Court of Justice. And Israel and Hamas continue talks on a ceasefire, but remain far apart on any length of any pause and the fate of Hamas's leaders in Gaza. Let's go to the war in Ukraine, where Russia's accused Ukraine of shooting down a military plane that it said was carrying dozens of Ukrainian POWs, killing everyone on board. That is a huge story this morning. British officials, still resolute in their support for Ukraine's war effort, are now lobbying American Republicans, British officials, lobbying American Republicans who have been hostile to further aid, which has got to be, man, would I like to hear one of those conversations. Listen, you have to understand, Congressman. I don't have to understand. Anyway, Viktor Orban, Hungary's prime minister, said he would push lawmakers to let Sweden join NATO, but he repeated the claim that the decision isn't his, even though his party controls parliament, having it both ways, Viktor Orban, because he's terrified and influenced by Vladimir Putin, and yet he has to balance that with the interests of the people of Hungary, his people. More international news. Measles is resurgent in parts of Europe where reported cases rose more than 40-fold last year, which is crazy. A man in Japan has been sentenced to death for the killing of 36 people in an arson attack on a Kyoto anime studio, according to the Washington Post. I think I knew Japan had capital punishment, and only in extreme cases, maybe, but still, I want to look into that story just about the idea of it. I didn't realize that. Of course, we do. In Alabama today, I mentioned this, I think, yesterday, they plan to execute Kenneth Smith, an inmate who survived before. He survived lethal injection by an untested method. They're going to kill him using nitrogen gas. The Supreme Court declined to stop the execution. So that's pretty horrific. That's America, and especially Alabama. Scientists announced the first successful, this is good news, the first successful embryo transfer in a white rhino, offering hope for endangered subspecies, according to Reuters. And I can't believe I didn't know this to ask today's guest, Andrew Spar, about it. But Florida State's university system yesterday eliminated sociology as a core course, which is terrible. Terrible. It's so important. I loved my sociology courses. I learned so much, and my eyes opened so much in college to those early sociology courses. But nope, the state education official said that left-wing activists have hijacked the subject, and I didn't realize recognize that, to ask Andrew Spar about it, but I will definitely look into that and talk to him about it next time. Those are your headlines. That is your news. I don't have any sound clips for you today because I'm running out of time. It's already super late. You probably already know a lot of that news, and I hope I didn't waste your time. But blame it all on Desiree and Ryan and her birthday last night. So if you're upset, I hope to see you at tonight's hangout, and we can talk more about the news and everything else as we always do. But now it's time to get to my guest, Andrew Spar. I was really excited to talk to him because of what's happening literally this week at our Board of Education with these parents screaming about parental rights and that they demand to know if their kid has changed their pronouns. And of course, listen, if you don't know that your kid's changing their pronouns, then you're the last one not to know, because the other kids know, their parents know. Get to know your kids. Spend some time with them. If your kid's dressing as a cat, maybe you could understand why. Try to figure it out. Or decides that they don't identify as the gender they were born as, maybe get to know that issue and get to know your kid before screaming at teachers who are only trying to protect students, the very rare case that they don't want to tell their parents they're using different pronouns because their parents might kick them out of... All right, you know what I'm saying. That's happening right now at the BOE in my town. And so I asked him about that, of course, and so much more that's happening in Florida, what his thoughts are on Ron DeSantis, who he knows, and his future. Andrew is a really great guy, a very inspiring leader who is the leader of the biggest teachers union in Florida, the Florida Education Association, which is a right to work state, they call it, really. As Andrew says, it's a right not to work, a right to work for less state. It's the largest association of professional employees in Florida, and it is a really great organization that I've gotten to know very well over the past several years because I've gone down there and spoken with them and traveled on the bus with them, working on their campaigns and the issues that they care about for teachers and students and parents. Yes, parents and families in schools as well. We had a lot to talk about. Let's get to it right now with Andrew Spar. There is my friend, Andrew Spar, one of the good ones, one of the best people I know, one of the most effective and inspiring leaders, and someone who I greatly admire. It's great to have you back on the show. You've been very busy, and I'm very grateful to have you. Thank you for joining me.
Absolutely, Pete. Thanks for having me.
Florida, education, those two words just bring up a lot in people's minds, and every time I think of Florida, I think of you, and every time I think of education and teachers, I think of you and all of your colleagues down there, many of which I've had the privilege of meeting. So, but first, I just got to ask you, what is your general reaction to Ron DeSantis, the governor, who you know well, who you've tangled with personally, professionally, I should say, and his no good, terrible campaign that started terribly and ended terribly and never got off the ground? What do you make of it? Are you surprised knowing him?
No, not really. I thought I had money on it that he was going to stay until South Carolina and get out then. So I guess I was surprised that he got out so quickly, especially since people were predicting him to finish third in Iowa and he finished second. I thought that was going to give him some, kind of like a push to stay in. And when he dropped out, it was pretty abruptly on Sunday. And what most people are surmising is he started talking about over the weekend, 2028. So I guess it was politically astute for him to drop out now and start thinking about 2028 as rather than going around and continuing to get thrashed, especially since, the polling out of New Hampshire and South Carolina had him in the low single digits. So, but
I feel like you never said, and if you did, I forgot, and you never told us how weird he was. Everybody's talking about how weird he is, like just not his politics, which are terrible, and his moral compass, which is non-existent. Just the way he behaves and stands and smiles. Like comedians have been having a field day with him, but voters don't like that. People don't like that. And Floridians know
he's not a very personable person at all. When we talk to lawmakers up here, he never goes down and talks to lawmakers. He sends staff to have conversations with lawmakers. So to us, it's always been kind of weird that he's wielded so much power in the legislature here, getting everything he wants when he has no relationships with anyone. And that's, when we started seeing that in the legislature and you start talking to people who knew him in Congress, they said the same thing, that in Congress he was very distant. No one had relationships with him. No one knew much about him. So it's odd that someone with that kind of, or lack of charisma, I guess you could say, would rise to the ranks of governor and a presidential candidate. But yeah, I think people didn't like his policies, and they don't like they didn't like him as a person. So I think that played out. And quite honestly, when he first started his campaign, he was going to be the Donald Trump alternative. And then he quickly switched into I'm a Trump-like person, but I'm better than Trump because I don't have all this baggage. And that clearly that didn't work with the folks who support Trump. They want Trump. They didn't want someone like Trump.
It's fascinating to watch how he flamed out. And the idea that you're telling me, it's the first I've heard of it, that he's considering 2028 is just, it's great. I think it's great. I can't wait. I can't wait to see him come back and try to smile. I mean, I just had so much fun watching him try to speak and making fun of him. And it's so
like that one time he was interacting with a student, but that's always been his thing. Like in Florida, he was at a school one time. There were students on the stage. This was during COVID. They had masks on, and he turned around him and said, "Take off those masks. We don't need to make a political statement here." And then
the kids,
again,
I remember that. It was like young black kids, and they were just like, why are we here? A, I'm just making assumptions. And B, what am I supposed to do? I'm told to wear this mask, and now the governor's telling me not to wear, and there's cameras on me. Like, it was such a terrible thing to put a child in that situation.
Yeah, and the children, these were not really children. They were high school kids, I believe. But they chose to wear a mask, and he was like, take it off. but you have the freedom not to, I guess, maybe.
Yeah, ridiculous. Tell me about this crazy story and your view on it that has unfolded in Florida with the Zieglers, Bridget and Christian Ziegler. Christian was like the head of the Florida Republican Party, and his wife was also a very influential person, and she was one of the people who apparently started the Moms for Liberty group, which unfortunately you know all too well. I know all too well. This movement to destroy public education and ban books and so much more. You can pick it up from there. But she basically, this controversy, she was one of the Moms from Liberty co-founders. Then she was on the board of Sarasota, right? The school board there. And then this controversy unfolded where she was having threesomes with a woman. Her husband is now under investigation for actually raping the woman that was in. It's a crazy story, but yet she is still, if I'm right, she's still on the board. She has not resigned.
She is still on the board. And so let's start with this whole thing, right?
Yeah, where do you want to start?
Just so people know who the Zieglers are. They moved into the Sarasota area here in Florida. They started a school, a charter school, and it was the classical education tied to Hillsdale College. So for those who don't know, Hillsdale College is an ultra-conservative college. It's not even, I think they have limitations on what they can do in terms of accreditation and such. And so they started this school with this classical education. And then she got, if my correction is right, she's got kicked off the school's charter schools board and stuff like that. But that's where her kids went and so on. And then she ran for school board, got elected to school board, her and her husband were a rising star in the Republican Party. They were big DeSantis backers. And so Christian became the chair of the Republican Party of Florida recently. She was on the school board. She ran as a Moms for Liberty candidate, very tied to Moms for Liberty. They got other people elected and took over the school board. Sarasota's school board was the school board the governor most pointed to where he got his ideologues elected. And this showed that this is how you run schools in Florida. And what's interesting is Bridget Ziegler at the time was chair of the school board there. And she said that she wanted to, one, bring in a superintendent who would fulfill what she wanted to have done. And again, she got three other school board members elected. So it was a 4-1 vote on a 5-member school board. There was only one person who was not on board with her. And they voted 3-2 not to take that was a 3-2 vote, I believe, not to take the superintendent she wanted, but to take someone who actually had an education background. Huh. That was her first loss. Then a little while afterwards, she was trying to bring in a company which was brand new, started by Hillsdale College, to advise on curriculum. It was a company that was going to clean the curriculum, make sure that they weren't teaching anything that would be against their values, right? What we would teach them, how we taught history, what history was like. So she was going to bring that in. That was a 4-1 vote against her. And then, of course, this whole thing breaks out that apparently these people who are, Bridget Ziegler, Christian Ziegler, pushing the banning of books in schools, don't allow kids to see any of this so-called pornographic material that they deemed pornographic because there were two people kissing in a book or something like that, and pushing that whole narrative. Apparently, the narrative they were fighting against is the one they live every day. And so, this story breaks that charges are being, or the crime is being investigated against Christian Ziegler for alleged rape, and that there was a threesome with his wife and another woman. And so, of course, all of that comes out. And now, keep in mind, Ron DeSantis, who has readily removed Democrats from office because he didn't like what they said, and there's a big case right now with Andrew Warren out of Tampa, a state attorney who the governor removed because he said, Andrew Warren said he was opposed to what the governor was doing on abortion and therefore removed him from office.
Wow.
The courts have said he should be put back, and this is still moving through the federal courts, and said the governor was wrong. He did not remove Bridget Ziegler, who ran on this whole campaign of everything else because she's close to him. And but the board there voted 4-1 to demand her resignation. And Bridget Ziegler was the only one who voted against it and will not resign.
Just to be clear, the entire Board of Education, the other members of the board, including the conservative ones, which I guess they probably all are.
The people she got elected voted against her, saying, get off the board. She will not step down. She's also on the Disney oversight board that the governor created in his battle with Disney World. And he's not removing her from that either, by the way. And then, of course, he did call on her husband to be removed as the chair of the Republican Party in Florida. That has happened. And by the way, law enforcement has decided not to pursue charges on rape, but is pursuing charges of video voyeurism.
He videotaped them having sex. I was wondering about that when I heard that detail. I was like, is that illegal? And I was talking to this guy, Ron Filipkowski, and he's a lawyer, and he's like, it's a little bit nebulous in Florida, but that's a crazy story. That the whole thing, everything you just said about her and what she's done, and this incestuousness of it all connected to DeSantis. And it took him a long time to ask Christian Ziegler to step down too.
Yeah, well, I'll just say this. I think the learning from this, if you will, is that these individuals who try to portray themselves as, better than anyone, holier than thou kind of people clearly aren't. And it goes back to don't throw stones if you live in a glass house kind of mentality. And I think that's what we see. And look, we're seeing that play out all over the country on these so-called Moms for Liberty candidates. They're not based on morals and values that many of us hold, and they portray themselves to be even better than that. And maybe we should be thinking, are they compensating for something, whatever the case may be? But when people want to tell us how to raise our kids and want to limit what our kids can learn in school, that mentality to me is just, it makes no sense. And I think it clearly comes down to this idea that, and we see it with the Zieglers, that what they're pushing is not how they live.
Most importantly, that's the most important. An anti-gay policymaker having gay sex. It's the height of hypocrisy. I mean, we've seen this obviously over and over and throughout human history, that kind of a thing, but it's just so terrible. And that's the kind of person that should never be in any kind of leadership on any kind of board. Let me ask you about parental rights, Andrew Spar. That's the fight that we continue to be having. Just a general question. When you hear that phrase, it's generally now coming from the right. It's probably focus group tested phrase. You would probably know. But when you hear parents complaining at board meetings, on Facebook, writing emails to whomever in the school administration about the rights, that they don't have enough rights, or that you've taken my rights, or that I should have more rights, what do you hear, and how are you handling that? Because you know what I'm getting to specifically, but generally speaking, the parental rights issue that we're hearing from the right, this screaming and crying.
Yeah, what I think has to be asked is whose rights, right? When they're talking about parental rights, they're not talking about parental rights. And it's a catchphrase that they use. I would say we probably advocate more for the rights of parents than anyone. And when I'm saying we, I'm talking about educators. Educators are constantly, you go to any school board meeting, go to any PTA meeting at your child's school, go to, if they have school advisory councils or some other governance kind of meeting at the school, go to those and tell me what the number one issue that they talk about. Every single one. What's the number one issue? Every faculty meeting. What's the number one issue? How do we get parents involved? How to get parents involved? How do we get more parents to come to the school? How do we get parents to check on their child's homework, right? Like there's no better advocate for parents being involved in a child education than the people who work in the school. Because we all know that for kids to be successful, we have to partner with the parents. And as a union, let me tell you, we have professional development that we do that is teacher-led. We actually have professional development about communicating with parents and how to get parents involved. For example, this is one of the best examples I'll give that came out of workshops that we, teachers, educators, through their union developed, which was when you assign homework, and some parents may be upset because they get these questions all the time, but when you assign homework to students, part of the homework should be go home and teach your parent what we learned today. There's a reason we do that. One, the kid has to demonstrate their knowledge. Two, they're engaging their parent. And three, now the parent knows what we're doing in school. And that's why we do those kinds of things. Assignments like that get the parents engaged and involved. You know, you've had your kid come home, I'm sure, and they say, hey, I've got an assignment for school. I've got to ask you some questions, you know, and they're like polling you or something like that.
Julia said the other day, I have to interview an expert. You're an expert interviewer. So tell me how to do an interview. And I was like, really? You are lazy. You could not find.
They're roping you into their schoolwork. And
you couldn't find a welder, a fisherman, someone with a real skill. No, you make really good points about the parental rights. And the argument I've been making is, as a parent, I have taken advantage of all of my rights since my daughters were in kindergarten and before. I went to the open houses. I met with the teachers. I volunteered in the classroom. I would reach out when I have a question to the teacher, the principal, or even the superintendent and board members, and they all get back to me. Those are all my rights. I use them all the time. What it sounds like you're saying is that teachers and administrators would love to partner more with parents, but parents don't get involved nearly enough. We're busy, we're uninterested, we're intimidated, we're whatever. But the truth is, you're the strongest advocate for the parents and constantly inviting the parents to join us. And the fact of the matter is we have all the rights in the world, whether or not we actually take advantage of them. These people that are screaming about parental rights, they half the time don't even know their kids' teachers' names. It's preposterous.
Yeah, you know, we've had the book banning issue in Florida. Florida leads the nation in the number of books banned.
Congrats.
Right? So we lead the nation. And so here's the thing. The majority of those books have been requested to be taken off the shelves by 6 individuals.
Right.
And 2 of those individuals actually are at the top of that list of 6 individuals. 2 of those individuals, one being in Escambia County, Pensacola, the other one being in Clay County, just outside of Jacksonville. And in both those cases, they're not even parents of kids in school. So when you hear things like parent rights, these are not parents of kids in school who are saying your kid shouldn't be able to read a book. Your kids shouldn't be able to learn something in their curriculum. This is people who don't have kids. These are people who don't have kids in school trying to dictate to you what your kid is allowed to learn. That is not parent right. That is the opposite. And I want to say one other thing real quick on this whole parent rights thing. We just had an election in Florida, a special election for a state house seat in the Orlando area. And this state house seat had long been held by a Republican. It was a swing district, but Republicans have held it for a long time. A Democrat won in the special election. And let me tell you what the Democrat ran on. They ran on 2 issues. They ran on the issue of the economic well-being of every citizen in a community, and they ran on reproductive freedom. And the Republican in that district was a school board member, or in that House district was a school board member, and she ran on the don't say gay stuff, she ran on the black, anti-woke stuff. That was her whole agenda, literally. And she lost. And interestingly enough, 1,100 more Republicans voted than Democrats in that election, and the Democrat ran.
Wow.
Because not only did the Democrats vote for the Democrat, the independents voted for the Democrats, and even some Republicans probably voted for the Democrat because they're tired of this attempt to divide. They're tired of this nonsense that has no impact on whether or not I can put food on my table tonight, whether or not I can pay for the roof over my family's head, and whether or not I can afford to get the prescription or go to the doctor when someone's ill in my family. And that's what people are starting to change on, I think, is that idea that we've got to do better for our community. And what's at the center of every community? Two things: the religious faith and schools. So people tend to center around their religious faith and they center around schools.
Right.
And you think about it again, as parents, Pete, when you go to your daughter's school or when you've been to your daughter's school, when you volunteered, who do you see at the school besides the kids? You see your neighbors. It's a place where we come together as a community. It's a place kids can be kids, and it's a place where adults go to connect with their neighbors and their community.
Well, let me just drill down on the specific parental rights issue that we're dealing with here, which deals with specifically LGBT community, specifically kids who want to change their pronouns in school. They say, I'm a he. I want you to refer to me as she. Might say, want you to call me a different name. And the issue becomes, should the teacher be contacting the parent if the kid says that? And my answer is no. The parent knows. I bet you the parent knows, so I wouldn't really, it's probably not that big of a deal because they can't imagine the parent. But maybe the parent doesn't know. Maybe the parent does. Now, at what point am I supposed to call my students' parents? Generally speaking, I would say if they broke a rule, if they broke the law, if they got in fights, but in terms of a kid changing their pronouns, we have a state policy here in New York, and our school, this is where the fight is. The people are screaming, saying, you're taking my parental rights. If my kid changes their pronouns and you don't tell me, then you're wrong. This is my business. You have to tell me what's going on with my kid. And the only reason the teacher wouldn't tell the parent is because they're concerned. This is what they're trying to explain to the community, and many people are not hearing this. If they would be concerned that the parent would be abusive towards the child. If the child says, listen, I don't want my parents to know that I refer to myself with different pronouns, because they would kick me out of the house, because they would disown me, because they would physically abuse me, then the teacher is supposed to get together with the school psychologist, maybe the principal, and decide the course of action, because they have what's called mandated reporters in the schools. You have to report if a kid is being abused. I'm going to stop there and let you pick it up, just trying to explain specifically what's going on here and how it should be thought about from the point of view of the school, because it's not easy. These aren't always easy situations, but you have to protect children from abusive parents sometimes. I mean, always, but sometimes there are abusive parents.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even go that far. I mean, look, as a parent myself, and Pete, you comment on this too, but as a parent myself, I want my child to be comfortable coming to me and talking to me about any issue that they feel is important. But I would be foolish to think they will. And so what I would want them to be able to do is have a conversation with a trusted adult, right? If they're not comfortable, for whatever reason, if they're not comfortable coming to talk to me about something, I want them to be able to go to a trusted adult. Who are the most common trusted adults in a community? Educators are among the most trusted. And so if they're at school and a child is dealing with a difficult situation, not sure, and this is very common, I think, in the LGBTQ community, where kids aren't ready to talk to their parent, but they need to talk to someone. And they have this teacher that they trust, and this teacher has created this safe space, and this child comes to him and says, I need to talk to you about who I am, and I don't want to tell my parent yet. I'm trying to figure this out. I'm trying to figure myself out, maybe even, right? And they want to have a conversation. We're blocking that. And that's happening in Florida right now, right? Florida passed a law that prohibits schools from calling children by names other than their name that was assigned at birth, other than their gender that was assigned at birth. And so we're prohibited from doing that now. And that has been the greatest fear, that kids who are like more often the most bullied kids in school, that need that safe space, that need that trusted adult, if they're not comfortable, what are we doing to their mental health? What are we saying to them? What's our message to them? Are we pushing them back in the closet where they don't talk at all? And how healthy for that? This is a segment of society that tends to have one of the highest suicide rates. Why aren't we addressing that? So to me, it's not even a parental rights issue. It's a mental health issue. It's a student's rights issue. We talk about parental rights. We talk about everyone else's rights. What about the kids' rights? And yes, some people might say, well, kids don't have rights as long as they're living under my roof.
Yeah.
But do they? I mean, are they humans? And how do we address that? And then the other thing on the nickname piece, I just want to add, Florida passed an extreme law, of course. You cannot call a kid anything other than the name that's on their birth certificate. And I think we talked about this before because I used this as an example. Ron DeSantis is Ronald DeSantis in Florida's public schools.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And here's the thing. I mean, literally at the beginning of the year, my daughter's school sent home a thing. If you want your child to be called anything other than the name that's on their official school record, which has to match their birth certificate, then you have to sign off and give permission. So for any of those nicknames, right, whether it's Ron, whether it's Bobby, whether it's Jimmy, anything that you want to call someone that's not their full given name at birth, you have to give permission. And that to me is crazy. That's just crazy.
That would have sucked when I was growing up because I insisted on being called Road Dog for some reason. And
I think you said that last time. Yeah.
The teachers we refused to do it. They were not accommodating to me. They're like, we're not calling you Road Dog.
Well, and I got to tell you, I had a kid when I tell this story a lot. When I was in the classroom and it was early on in my teaching career, we had a student who came to school, a kindergartner, and he couldn't remember his teacher's class, where he was supposed to go, second day of school, rode the bus. And he was telling us his name and we couldn't find his name anywhere. And eventually we connected, well, who'd you ride the bus with today? And it was his cousin. Who's your cousin? And then we were able to find his cousin and figure out, yeah, he was telling us his nickname because that's all he knew, because that's what he had been called his whole life. And now you're saying when they come to school, you can't even call them a nickname on the first day of school. The kid's going to say, they're going to say, what's my name? And they're going to tell you their name. And you're going to be like, well, you're not on my roster. Who are you? Wait, what is your name? I can't call you that name. I mean, it's crazy.
It really is. And I'm in the fight. I'm in the fight with these folks in my community. And they're just so adamant that they are having their rights stolen. But it's hard because I think I feel like you end up getting in an argument with parents about the simple idea of whether or not you own your kids. I mean, there's a lot of these people that think they own their kids and they're authoritarians, and there's not much you can say to them or do about that if that's how they feel. Like, I don't know, a lot of these parents think they should be able to hit their kids. And
we have this thing called teen rebellion, like we all go through that. What we can argue over which age is the most difficult. Is it 13? Is it 14? Is it 16? Right. But I think if you have raised kids, at some point you've hit that point where your kid is not listening to you. They're not doing what you would expect of them to do. And you're trying to guide them through that. Look, they're not going to come to you at that point in some respect. Right. And the question is, are you going to continue to live in that world where that's okay? Or do you want them to kind of have that opportunity? And yeah, I mean, you get into a whole thing of how do we raise our kids and what's appropriate. And absolutely, I do believe parents have rights. Absolutely. I mean, we do. We have a lot of rights. This is not the debate that's happening right now.
Yeah,
the debate that's happening not right now is, look, our poll, we did a poll. And the poll we did found out that the governor's education system is all wrong. Like, he is so wrong. There are more voters in Florida who now think public schools are heading in the wrong direction than the right direction in our poll, because they don't agree with the book banning. And one of the things we asked them was, should parents have the right to tell other parents their kid can't read certain books, or should it just be kept to their child? And overwhelmingly, it should just be their child. You should have the right to say, I don't want my kid reading that book. In Florida, you do. You should have the right to say, I don't want my kid participating in that assignment. In Florida, you do, and always have, right? But what you shouldn't have the right to do is, I don't want my kid to read that book, and I don't want any other kid to read that book.
It goes back, though, to the point I'm making about this demanding the pronoun thing, because when I'm arguing with this guy openly and publicly on Facebook, I'm saying, listen, man, worry about your kids. Worry about your kids. You're outing other kids who don't maybe want their parents to know. It's not up to you. It's not for you. That is so ethically wrong. It's not. By the way, it's strange for a conservative to want the state to out other kids' private information. It's so anti-conservative and anti-government, anti-big government. And that's what they're doing. They're saying out other people's kids because this guy's kids don't have pronouns. They're not changing their pronouns. Why is he worried about what my kids are doing or my relationship with my kids? It's so wrong.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, kids need to feel safe. They need to be seen. They need to see themselves in their learning. When you think back, and I've been doing this a lot, I reflected a lot over the holiday. And so I've been saying this a lot, and I was thinking about my kids and I was thinking about my childhood, right? And when you think of your childhood, you can't think of your childhood without thinking about school, right? Like I can't, there's some aspect of school you're thinking about it. And I started thinking about teachers I had in school who really made an impact on me. Mrs. Siapa in fifth grade, Dr. Goodwin, Mr. Black, there were just tons of teachers and I can go on and on. And these were teachers who made a difference in my life and who actually got me to become a teacher. And I was thinking about why did they make such a difference in me? They were able to interact with me. They were able to see me as who I was. They were able to encourage me and inspire me and excite me about learning. And then I think about what teachers today and why they're leaving the classroom. They're leaving the classroom obviously because of low pay, but they're also leaving the classroom because they can't do that anymore. There's like laws in place that are saying you cannot connect to your kid, your students, the way we want them to. You cannot connect students to their learning. You cannot excite them about what they're learning and really get them to blossom and grow and be the kinds of students we want every child to be. And that's why they're leaving.
It's one of the things that's so infuriating to hear these people say is let teachers teach, let parents parent, like when we were little. Like what? What? That doesn't even make any sense, by the way. I mean, like parenting, and you're occupying a lot of the same role as a parent and a teacher. It's a little bit nebulous to let the parents parent and let the teachers. Listen, my kid is on the bus. If my kid's in school for 8 hours, they're with somebody else for 8 hours, and their parents teach and teachers parent to some extent.
Look, I will say this, and I know we got to wrap up soon, but let me say this. I talked about a poll we did and what it showed that parents want in public, voters want in public education. They want strong public schools. They want teachers to be compensated well. They think it's really bad for teachers and staff right now in our schools. Well, Mason-Dixon, which is a very reputable polling company, tends to be fairly conservative. They just did a poll recently, and they found that 72% of voters in Florida, including the majority of Republican voters, 54% of Republican voters, believe teachers in Florida should have the right to strike without consequence. Wow. Now, in Florida, teachers can't strike. If we go out on strike in Florida, we lose our retirement, we lose our job, we lose our teaching certificate, right? The penalties are ridiculously severe. But people are saying in Florida, the governor and legislature has gotten it so wrong, and it is so bad that teachers should have the right to strike without consequence so they can fight for smaller classes, so they can fight for the rights of students, so they can make sure that every student sees themselves in reading, in their learning, so that they can make sure that books are in the classroom, so that they can make sure that kids have access to advanced placement classes, career and tech classes, so they can have experiential learning, so that they can excite students about learning. That's what voters in Florida have said, that the governor and the legislature have gone too far. And while the governor is touting how he's trying to kill unions in the state of Florida, his own voters are saying teachers should have the right to strike without consequence. They should have recourse so that they can do what is right for every child in the state of Florida and not the governor's political agenda.
That is a major development and trend change ideologically. It's a
seismic shift in the electorate in my mind, right? That voters who typically have said, we don't like the idea of unions, we don't like the idea of striking. Florida is what I call a right to work for less state.
Right.
We do have unions, we do have collective bargaining, but the way the system is set up is really stacked against us in a lot of respects. And they have tried killing us, right? They passed legislation last year to knock out unions. They said we wouldn't be standing. Guess what? We're standing. We are down a little bit because of what they've done, and we're working our way back. But the predictions were we would have, 50%, maybe 70% of where we were last year. We have over 85% of what we had last year, and we're continuing to grow and build because educators want a union and because people understand the importance of unions.
That's awesome. Yeah, and that's not that surprising because you've been such a great leader down there, and I'm happy to hear that news. That's a big, big development. I'll let you go, but, man, I love talking to you. I always having you here on the program and in my life and being such a good friend. President, Florida Education Association, Andrew Spar, it's always a huge pleasure and privilege when we get to talk to you. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thanks, Pete. Always good to be here.
Yeah, Andrew Spar, Florida Education Association. If you're in Florida, go support them. And even if you're not, go support them. Follow them on all social media and Andrew Spar, and thank him for joining us here. That was so great. As always, love talking to him. And thank you very much for listening to that conversation today, you bumblebees who listen all the way to the end. The greatest, the most loving, thoughtful, kind, curious people, and, well, you guys are the best. All right. Thank you very much for today. I hope to see you tonight at our hangout. John Carroll will be in Vegas. I hope you will be too. Let's let him take it away.